bit. Really, really good, thought-provoking buying journey. They're part of what is inspiring consumers to start thinking and start getting into a consideration phase. We've learned about the fact that they play this key role in consideration, and of course they affect purchase behavior. We've learned a lot about any number of things that have led us here today to think, okay, really, how can we build our brand? How can we affect results through these people? And I think if I hear you all correctly, the two things that are most on your mind about business and what's changing are, one, the shifting retail landscape. It is changing so quickly, and what does that mean? Just the uncertainty, the instability. What does that mean for our business? And two, the way marketing is evolving, and the fact that consumers are getting really quite good at ignoring ads. All of us, we all are the consumers, and all of us are getting really good at fast forwarding over the commercials on our DVRs, getting the software on our phone that's an ad blocking software, not even literally not even seeing the parts of our computer screen that we think are ads. And if that's true, you say, wow, okay, well, we're going to try and take more control of the buying experience, but how does that really work? What is happening with retail? It's getting more and more fragmented and more just changing so fast. And if we're going to try and do more on the awareness front, how do we keep up on that front as well? How do we adapt and tap into those shifts? And I guess for me personally, I couldn't help but have the Amazon Whole Foods transaction last week just really make me think and reflect on, wow, yeah, retail really is continuing to shift quickly. And how does commerce continue to evolve? And look, I cannot predict the future better than anyone else, but I do know two things for sure. I know for sure that great product companies will win. Product companies are the center. The only reason there is retail is that there are great product companies, and they will continue to evolve and thrive. And the other thing I know for sure is that consumers will seek out people they perceive as having expertise for considered purchase goods. Every single transaction for a considered purchase good, at some point, whether it's a review that's written, or whether it's the advice of a colleague you perceive as an expert, or whether it's the person you find in the retail store, every single considered purchase transaction flows through one of these people the world conceives or perceives as an expert. And given that, how can we then together go and help these people be better on your behalf? How can we help them be better at figuring out the right fit with the customer, making the right recommendation, getting to them the tools that help them really drive that outstanding buying experience? And how can we get from them the things that help you grow your business, evolve your products, run your store, have content for the diversifying marketing channels? So everything today is geared on trust. And maybe one of the most fundamental things we've learned about these people does have to do with their motivations and how to affect those things. We've learned that for these people, for example, we all thought, boy, you're going to have to force stuff to these people. You're going to have to make it required in order to get them to consume content, for example. Turns out that's not the case. These people crave more information. They crave feeling like they're on the inside and that they understand more deeply the category and your products than others. First-hand experience, the enormous role having first-hand experience with the product plays in helping them to make great recommendations. That not only do they have ideas about how a market is evolving, but they are dying to share those ideas back with us. And that the content, whether it's in the form of reviews they write or pictures they take, has that right aspirational element, comes across as authentic, and comes across as trustworthy. So how do we tap into all of that? How do we make all of this something that helps us learn how to build better products and then deliver those and help customers, ultimately consumers, first find you, discover you, and then fall in love with you and begin that relationship or maintain that relationship over time. So lots and lots to chew on, lots to think about, lots to get really deep about and push on each other about and continue to learn about. 10 years in, this still feels like the beginning to me. It still feels like there's so much to learn and it's evolving so quickly in really, really exciting ways, and that we all happen to be in the place where commerce is evolving best and in the most interesting ways. And so we'll look forward to lots. Before we go on, questions just right off the top? A couple of logistical things. The bathrooms are right behind that back wall. You just walk out the doors here and to the stairs, and it's kind of, you either go around the stairs or under the stairs, but the bathrooms are right there. There are plenty of people here to take care of any of your caloric or beverage dreams. I'm sure we can get something sorted out on that front. What else should we cover? Am I missing anything? Team, someone give me a heads up. Okay, great. Again, enjoy this talk. We'll look forward to seeing you throughout the morning, this afternoon with some activities, this afternoon with some exploration of things that for us on the product front, again, around these, hey, what do we do to create great product education? What do we do to create great product seeding? What do we do to enable market research in a way that is just more economical and more seamless and with the people you really want? And what do we do to get content and reviews from these people who are at the leading edge of the market? We're going to give a peek into each of those elements, and really it's going to be a kind of hands-on experiment. You're going to be seeing people and talking with people who are literally in the guts of making these things right this minute. And then this evening, really looking forward to the discussion and the debrief and the reflections on it. So thank you so much for being here. We love having you here, and enjoy it.
The trust factor. I joined the company full-time in October of last year after advising the company for about 2 years. So it's really, really exciting to be here. I wanted to open with something that Mark Zuckerberg shared with the investor community in 2007 when he was just 23 years old, as he was trying to explain to them the potential for Facebook as a business. He said, "A trusted recommendation from a friend is the holy grail of advertising." And this was a powerful quote because everybody's always believed that a trusted recommendation was a holy grail for sales. I mean, it's the way that high consideration products have always moved from person to person. But Facebook showed the promise of doing this at scale. And people paid attention to that claim. I paid attention to that claim. Just a couple years later, I was comfortable in an awesome job up in Seattle at Microsoft, but I thought this sounded like a really, really compelling, interesting journey. And so I packed up my wife, who was pregnant with our first kid, and we drove from Seattle down to Palo Alto. And I joined Facebook in 2010 to go on this journey of finding the holy grail of advertising. And what I learned in my years at Facebook is that the quest for this holy grail had an awful lot in common with the quest for another well-known holy grail. Specifically, it was fraught with all kinds of distractions and dangers and pitfalls and even outright imposters, some of which were huge wastes of resources and time. And it reminded me a lot of Indiana's nemesis, Donovan, who was distracted to his death by a literal shiny object. He literally chose the most shiny grail among the selection, got sidetracked, and it led to his demise. I'll wait. Can you guys still hear me? Okay. Indiana was actually successful in finding the real grail because he understood the source of the grail's power. So when he walks in and he sees all of those grails spread out on the table, he isn't looking for the shiniest one, the newest one. He confidently surveys them and declares, that's the cup of a carpenter. Because he understood the source of the grail's power. And so it's interesting because we're 10 years after Mark Zuckerberg uttered those words about social being the holy grail. And when I look across the social landscape, and I would guess that this would be the case if each of you looked at what you were doing socially in your marketing strategies, what I see is a bunch of stuff that really has nothing to do with trusted recommendations from friends. I see things like CRM-based custom audiences, autoplay video ads, and cookie-based retargeting ads, and they work to be sure, but they're not this holy grail that we set out to find back in 2007. So that is what it is. That's okay. Facebook's doing just fine as a business, and most of our marketing tactics are working well on Facebook. But now this attention on the holy grail has shifted from social to influencer marketing. And people are now saying things like, boy, influencers with their potential authenticity and their credibility and their organic reaches can deliver the holy grail of advertising, these recommendations at scale. The trouble is, we're on the cusp of making some of the very same mistakes that we made with social on influencer marketing, unless we take a step back and understand what is the source of influencers' power. What is the true source of influence in influencer marketing? Now, I believe that the true source of influence's power to change people's behavior stems from two distinct things that I'll articulate through two moderately embarrassing stories. This is me in high school. What's around my neck? Puka shells. Puka shells, right? Because in like the late 90s, the cool kids wore puka shells. And the cool kids in my high school wore puka shell necklaces. And because of their influence over me, I bought puka shell necklace and I wore the puka shell necklace way longer than I should have. And fashion historians will decide whether I was right or whether I was wrong, but the cold hard truth is I was influenced by the kids who wore puka shell necklaces. And it's interesting because nobody ever sat me down, none of these cool kids sat me down and said, listen, if you're going to get a necklace, I highly recommend the puka shell because it has more durability and the way it catches the light really attracts girls, and you'll do much better if you can get a puka shell necklace. I never even had a conversation with these people. They simply were cool, charismatic kids that I looked up to. They had a lifestyle that I wanted to emulate. And that illuminates for us the first source of influence, inspiration. If a person inspires other people, if their lifestyle inspires them, then consumers want to emulate those people, and their purchases fall in order. Okay? Source number one is inspiration. Source number two. When I was 16, I got my Eagle Scout, right? And I was effectively graduating from the scouting program. I had picked up an eagle and a palm or two, and I was basically done. And most of my friends sort of graduated out of scouting, but I had just fallen in love with the outdoors, and I wanted to continue to get up in the mountains. Actually, if you go hiking today, you'll be able to look out over the lake over here. The Uinta Mountains is where I spent all my time. I loved it. And so I decided I was going to stay active in the outdoors, and somehow I got the idea in my head that I was going to take up fly fishing. But I didn't know the first thing about fly fishing. So I go to my parents and I'm like, hey, I want to take up fly fishing, and I need to get some stuff, presumably. And my parents didn't really know anything about fly fishing. But there was this neighbor of ours, and he had been a fly fishing guide in Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho for 15 years, and was now a wildlife artist. This guy knew everything there was to know about fly fishing. So we reach out to him, hey, Kevin wants to get into fly fishing, can you help him out? So this guy hops in his vintage Land Cruiser and takes us down to Fish Tech, a fly shop in probably Cottonwood Heights, Utah. And we go in there and he introduces me to his friends who run this fly fishing shop. And it's important to note that they didn't immediately sell me the best fly rod. They didn't jump to a Sage fly rod and, say, listen, if you're really going to do it and do it right, you got to spend $1,100 on a fly rod, another $300 on a reel. And they said, how much experience do you have? Okay, you're a brand new beginner. Okay. Where are you going to fish? How often are you going to fish? What kind of fish do you want to catch? And based on that, and the all-important question, what is your budget, they made a very personalized recommendation to me. And I bought every single thing they told me to that day. And it worked. I fell in love with fly fishing. And despite having not lived in Utah for about 10 years, I continue to fly fish in Utah on the very streams that this fly fishing guide told me about, using the same equipment and other equipment that this same fly shop continues to recommend to me. And I buy everything they tell me because I trust them so much. So the second source of influence isn't so much inspiration as it is advice. If I trust the person giving me advice, it's a fast track to my own decision making. Okay. Now, the question that this prompts in my mind is, if there are different kinds of influence, inspiration and advice, then there must by definition be different kinds of influencer. And yet, we just speak categorically about influencers. It helps me to visualize the influencer landscape by plotting influencers on this spectrum, ranging from advice, where your source of influence stems from your expertise and credibility, to inspiration, which is more about your lifestyle. And when you do that, you see that there are three distinct types of influencer that naturally emerge. The first we call experts. The second we call publishers. And the third we call tastemakers. Let's talk about each one of them. Starting with experts. This is Kristen Jim. Kristen has a YouTube channel where she talks about makeup products and does makeup tutorials. And she doesn't have an enormous following. In fact, most of her videos get between 2,000 and 6,000 views. And this is not her walking the red carpet. This is not her rubbing shoulders with the Kardashians. This is really specific, high expertise content, how to pull off the olive smoky eye, and then the rest of the words I don't understand. And that's her credibility, right? She understands the products, what makes them good. She understands the techniques and how you can pull off looks, and she does these tutorials. And for thousands of women, her advice is incredibly influential. Okay? Let's look at the second type, a publisher. This woman is Gabrielle Blair, aka Design Mom. Gabby has 6 kids ranging from probably 7 years old up to 18 years old. So she knows a thing or two about motherhood and parenting. And she also is a designer by trade. And she was constantly getting asked for advice about parenting and design, and how, your kids seem so happy, like how do you pull this off? And she'd written books and all this stuff, and she ended up creating a blog called Design Mom that gave her an opportunity to monetize her expertise. So today, Design Mom is one of the most widely read mom blogs on the internet. And the way Gabby makes money off of this is in two forms. First, you've got banner ads across the top, like this one for Disney World. And then she also does partnerships with relevant brands like this company, Legacy Box, which will digitize your family photos. And if you've got 6 kids, half of whom were born before camera phones, you've got a bunch of photos that you might want to digitize. So it makes perfect sense. And Gabby makes a good living on this. And the key difference between her and an expert is she's built herself a platform by establishing the blog, which gives her broader reach. She's no different than Martha Stewart. The only thing different between her and Martha Stewart, or Rachel Ray, or Anna Wintour, is she has a slightly smaller audience. But it's the same mechanics. Finally, let's look at tastemakers. This is Amber Fillerup-Clark. And Amber is a quintessential tastemaker. So quintessential that she was recently profiled by The Atlantic as they dived into influencer marketing. They speculated, by the way, that Amber makes between $2 and $4 million a year promoting products for brands. And if you look at these posts, she looks exactly like what we think of when we think of influencers, right? Just this beautiful lifestyle photography. And you can see how brands would want to be part of this. You can see how brands would want to put the proverbial puka shells around her neck and inspire people to buy them. She actually lives in Hawaii right now, but she still doesn't wear puka shell necklaces, so I was just totally misguided, as it turns out. What's really interesting about Amber, though, and so many of these tastemakers, including people like Anna Wintour, is that she began as an expert. Amber has really long blonde hair, and she loves to braid it. And when she went off to college, everyone was asking her, how do you pull off those braids? How do you do that? That's so cool. That's so inventive. That's so creative. And so finally, she just set up a YouTube channel, and she started doing hair braid tutorials. This is the first one she ever did. It was, like 7 years ago or something. And in all these years, it's only picked up 21,000 views. Right, so back then she wasn't that big of a deal. She just had these good hair braiding tutorials. Well, she also had a blog, but it was one of those like blogger.com blogs that you would talk about how you went on a date with a boy at college and like your cousins would comment and like that was it. But what she did is she decided to combine her expertise in hair with her blog and become a publisher. And so she became a publisher with Barefoot Blonde, her blog. And it was filled with tutorials like how to pull off these braids in 3 minutes each. And she monetized it through ads, through brand partnerships, and ultimately, as you see up in the top, through her own line of hair extensions. Now today, this is most of Amber's content. This berry print combo, more of my favorites from J. Crew on my blog today, #JCrewAlways, #sponsored. This has nothing to do with hair. This has everything to do with the lifestyle that Amber has come to embody and the fact that J. Crew wants to ride that wave of inspiration. And it's important, there's a really distinct difference here between the type of influence that stems from inspiration and that which stems from advice. She isn't saying that if you're going to get a berry print bathing suit, you should get the J. Crew one because they have special double stitching and they have this and that. She's just saying it looks cute and fits into her lifestyle. And she may just as well drive sales of berry print combos at places like Target and Old Navy as she does at J. Crew. Because what she is a taste maker. She sets style. And millions of women follow her, and that's very relevant. Now, when you look across this and try to layer this against your marketing objectives, I find it fascinating to just tip this sucker on its side, and what you end up with is types of influence that map perfectly to the traditional marketing funnel. And if you're going to partner with somebody like a tastemaker, like Amber Fillerup, you're basically playing exclusively in the awareness category. And I would venture to say that virtually everything that the general marketing community considers influencer marketing today is squarely aimed at awareness. It's Instagram followers, pseudo-celebrity status, beautiful lifestyles, and paid reach. Awareness mechanisms. So, the first question I have is, well, how did this end up? Because we started with this quote from Mark Zuckerberg about the Holy Grail and trusted recommendations. People have always known that word of mouth was an incredibly effective means. We've just always wanted a better way to scale it and manage it. And the history here is really interesting, and it's something that I've been fortunate to see firsthand. What happened was back in 2012 and 2013, 3 new social networks emerged onto the scene, and they were huge. They had collectively hundreds of millions of active users. And they did something that was completely unprecedented, and they, of course, are Instagram, Pinterest, and Snapchat. They did something completely unprecedented. If you remember, think back to the Facebook movie with Eduardo Saverin. They were selling ads against Facebook when they were still in the dorm room. Facebook always had ads. MySpace always had ads. That's part of what led to the downfall, was no control over the advertising experience. And what these companies said is, well, Facebook was able to maneuver it, but MySpace was not. We want to be darn sure we don't screw up the user experience and shoot the goose that lays the golden egg. Let's make sure that we nail the user experience and just tiptoe into monetization. And I know this because I worked at Facebook when we acquired Instagram in 2012, and then I joined Pinterest in 2013 when we sat around and decided this was the decision we were going to make. And so we raised a bunch of money. And what was interesting is these brands said, well, hold on a minute. You have hundreds of millions of cumulative users? Like hell, we're not going to get in front of those people. If we can find a way onto Pinterest or Snapchat or Instagram when nobody else can simply buy their way in, we're going to have an incredibly high share of voice. And so they looked across all of their marketing resources and said, how can we get our way into these networks? And the answer was in the very publishers that we talked about a couple of slides ago. The answer was they went to these publishers and said, listen, you have a pretty good following on your blog, and we have an established practice with you where we pay you on a CPM basis to put ads or sponsored posts on your blog as a function of how many people follow you and read your blog. Well, we also noticed that you're pretty popular on Pinterest. And we would love it if, as an extension of what we're doing on your blog, you could just post these things on Pinterest. We'll pay you the same way. How many followers do you have? Great. We'll come up with a CPM and we'll pay you that way. And lo and behold, what began as influencer marketing abruptly becomes paid reach. The same as any other type of paid advertising. What differentiates it is perfectly native. The functionality is precisely the same as organic content because its distribution is purely organic. And there are pros and cons to that. Users think that it's organic, but you miss out on some of the targeting and other controls that you would have through paid advertising. Well, I think this is a big miss for the industry. I think that that's a reasonable tactic to take, but only if you understand that all you're doing is furthering the objectives that you would tackle with your regular paid advertising and paid reach. So it's an awareness play, generally speaking. So the next question this leads to is, how can we address the entire funnel through influencer marketing? And there are a bunch of ways of doing this, but one of these is through experts. And this is what attracted me to Experticity, the company, and what made me so excited about joining this company is here, we've been saying forever, well, sure, word of mouth recommendations are great, but you just can't scale them. You can't find all the people who are credible in mountain biking and just, get them the right message. Except that about 10 years ago, this company started in the shadows of the Wasatch Mountain in Salt Lake City with a fairly narrow but important mission of digitizing salesperson training. And then almost through happenstance, as the company improved and built upon the experience over the years, you end up with 1 million trusted experts. And now it becomes a full-fledged marketing solution that can deliver across the entire journey. And it delivers in 2 ways. And by the way, we call these people experts because they have the right combination of passion, experience, and knowledge that make them a trusted source of advice and inspiration. And this guy who helped me get into fly fishing, I was inspired by the fact that he was just a veritable badass and he had so much fun out in the outdoors and he had this vintage Land Cruiser and he was so cool. And because he had so much knowledge and so much experience, I trusted him to get me into the sport. So, Experticity has always been in the advice business. And what you've all understood, that many in the industry have not, is that by finding the people who command trust and credibility, you can influence the masses. Because these people are coming to this guy for advice all the time. 15 times more often than the average consumer gets asked for advice on products. And so this has been a wonderful journey and business for us, and it's led to a lot of success for you, and it's why we're all in this room, and that's wonderful. But there's also this piece. These experts are also inspirational because they have so much passion, and their experiences show up on Instagram like the rest of ours, and they're out there living these lives where you're like, man, like I've got this friend on Instagram who runs like 70 miles a week, and I just think it's so cool, and he's always a bit of an inspiration to me, and I try my darndest to get into it. I follow these fly fishing guides on the Provo River just out here in Heber City, and I only get to go fly fishing maybe 7 times a year, but they go every day, and so I love consuming their content, and it transports me to the river. So just like I look to those guys for inspiration, there are all these people who look to experts for inspiration because they lead the lifestyles enabled by the products in this room that your companies make. But there's a very important distinction here between the way we in this room think of this and the way that most people are practicing the inspiration component of influencer marketing. Most people are saying, we need to find people with tons of followers, because if we use paid advertising, it's somehow perceived as inauthentic. And yet, the paradox here, in order to get these people to post the content you want, it's become paid advertising. And the FTC has cracked down, and now you have to call it out and say hashtag ad and hashtag sponsored. And why did the FTC do that? Because consumers were feeling slighted. They were feeling like they were being taken advantage of. And that's why a recent Forrester study showed that only 17% of people trust influencers anyway, because they know that they're just being paid. Now there's a different way of approaching this that I think is far more compelling, and some of the brands in this room are doing, and I'm excited to show some examples. And that is, find the people who have genuine, authentic, incredible stories. The experts who are out there passionately running and hiking and climbing and biking and doing makeup and surfing and all of those types of things, and they're healthy. And you can tell that from the way they live their lives. And use the tactics and the mechanisms and the products available to marketers to scale those people's reach. Put another way, don't worry about how many Instagram followers they have, because your brand can get them as much reach as you need. And what consumers will look to is the credibility and authenticity of the message, not the delivery mechanism. Does that make sense? Okay, let me show you some examples. Traeger grills. So Traeger is sourcing this content from experts who are part of the Experticity network, and this is just really inspiring stuff. I mean, you can't look at this and not think, my goodness, I could do with some upping of my grilling game. Every time I see this stuff, I'm like, honey, I really think we need one, and then, well, you know, where are we going to put it and all that? But I am totally inspired by this content every time I see it. Anybody know how many followers this guy has on Instagram? No, I don't know either. Nobody cares, because Traeger is putting this on their website where people are looking at Traeger grills, and it's inspiring, and it plays toward that top of funnel and middle of funnel stuff. All right, the next one's going to have some audio. Shout out to Jimmy from Vortex who's in the house. Vortex came to us and said, hey, can you just help us find the Vortex expert, like the best one? And it's this guy from Texas who works at Academy Sports, and his name is Dylan Isabel. And have a look at this exchange, and then what became of it.
That's super cool. So basically what we want to do is we just want to see if you want to come with us to NRA.
That's pretty awesome. That's kind of blowing me away right now. I was like, oh, we'll send you a free shirt or, something like that, because it's so loyal. Vortex.
All right, so Dylan, you're on the spot. What is your number one must-have favorite product in the Vortex booth?
As a bow hunter, that bino with the range-finding capability would keep me from having to switch between binos and rangefinder. Second to that, I would probably go the Viper PST Gen 2. Start with a 1 to 6 by 24. They go down to the 2 to 10 magnification, and then we go to 3 to 15 in magnification, and then the ultimate 5 to 25 by 50.
So authentic, right? And so they did a Facebook Live with him where there were tons of comments that came in. But the important thing here is Dylan has so much passion for hunting and so much passion for Vortex that it doesn't really matter how many Instagram followers he has, because the brand has followers and the brand has other mechanisms. And instead of just putting general marketing content out there, hiring models and using stock photography and things like that, they've tapped into a guy whose authenticity is very obvious. I mean, you just can't fake that just magnificent accent and his knowledge about hunting. And I learned a lot about bow hunting even from just those 45 seconds. Another example here, 511s in the house I see. I think this is so interesting. You've got people who are finding their way to the 511 tactical website, and they've taken a bunch of Instagram content, user-generated content, and they put it on that website. But as we get further down the funnel into intent and consideration and purchase, what they're doing is they're saying, hey, this is really authentic stuff, and real authentic people are using this content, or using these products rather. And so there's this relatability and this trustworthiness that comes into it, and then when you hover over any of these products, it becomes shoppable. So you can move from inspiration straight into purchase really, really quickly in a really slick way. And then we've got Reebok here too, and I don't want to steal thunder from the panel this afternoon, but what's really interesting about this is when they launched the float ride, they wanted to, it was primarily going to be sold on Reebok.com, at least in the early days of the shoe's launch. And so the important hurdle you need to overcome in an e-com experience when there isn't a lot of first-hand familiarity with the product, you know, you can't like go to a store and try it on, is you got to make people confident in the decision. And the way Reebok tackled that was by getting more than 500 product reviews from members of the Experticity community, such that when people come to Reebok.com and see the float ride and think, okay, maybe I could do this shoe. This seems pretty cool. And then they can read these reviews from people like fitness instructors and running coaches and avid runners, and it helps them over that hurdle because these people are effectively giving advice on what the shoe is great for in their experience. This has propelled the float ride to be the #4 selling product on Reebok.com, which is pretty remarkable when you consider it launched on April 1st. And there's hundreds of products on Reebok.com. And finally, when we get to the point of sale, brick and mortar is not going away, and I'm very excited about the future that specialty retail holds. Because if you can go in and you can talk to somebody who actually knows what they're talking about and get advice from them, it's incredibly empowering as a consumer. And that's the opportunity that Wusthof saw when they looked at it and said, okay, Wusthof is a brand that doesn't sell direct to consumer, they sell through retail. But they want to make sure that when you walk into a retail store that sells Wusthof, there's somebody there who can actually help you choose the best set of knives. And so they need to have education about the product, and importantly, Wusthof wants to make sure they have firsthand experience with the product. And so what they did is they developed content in partnership with the Experticity Studios team on Experticity that would educate these salespeople about what differentiates the Wusthof knives and things like that. They also wanted to make sure these people had a personal connection to the brand and its products, and so using the product seeding product that we have, they got this product into the hands of these salespeople at a discount so that they could try it for themselves and use it and fall in love with it. And the result is, and because as many of you may know, we got our start as a company in the outdoor industry, and housewares and cookware is a newer category for us, and so we're not as ubiquitous in that category as we are in, say, outdoors. And so, as luck would have it, that's the glass half full approach. As luck would have it, we didn't have every single retail associate in this chain part of Experticity. And that ended up with basically a 50-50 split. Half of the stores had Experticity experts, and half of them did not. And so Wusthof worked with this particular chain to get the data, the sales data, over a 7-month period, and found that overall, things were going really well. Their marketing was working, and sales were up 2%. But in sales where there were experts engaging with Wustof's content on Experticity, sales weren't up 2%, they were up 7%, 3.5 times more. And that's awesome, and that's great for Wusthof, but it's also great for these consumers who are trying to make informed purchases and find their way to the right products. So, in closing, all of the tools, all the full breadth of digital marketing and influencer marketing is in front of us. But as a knight wiser than me once said, you must choose, but choose wisely. And I hope that what we can do over the course of today and tomorrow is learn from one another how each of your companies are tapping into experts for expert-fueled marketing solutions, and how that can deliver results across all of your marketing challenges and the entire buying journey. Okay, that's it for me. I am going to hand it off to Kent Grayson. And Kent is a professor of marketing at the Kellogg School at Northwestern, which, and I say this as somebody who went to a rival school, is probably the world's premier marketing institution. And Kent has his PhD from there, and he's the faculty director of something called the Trust Project. And I won't steal his thunder by telling you too much about the Trust Project, except that the name is obviously very compelling for our purposes today. And I had the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with Kent yesterday and talk through some of his research, and I'm sure you're going to find it both fascinating intellectually and practical as marketers. So I will hand it over to Kent.
Thanks. Good morning. Thanks to Experticity for inviting me here. Thanks to everyone who spent time with me yesterday, generous with your time. I got to talk to Dylan yesterday on the phone. He's amazing, incredible. And also thanks to Diana and Travis particularly for helping to connect me with Experticity and with this event. I'm going to talk about the Trust Project in a little bit. It's a project that focuses on trust, and that I hope I can share with you some of the insights that we've found at the Trust Project and that you can find by visiting the Trust Project. I want to start by telling you a story about something that happened to me in college. I went to school in the Midwest, but I grew up in a small town in New England. And when I was at college, whenever I'd go back home for holidays or for a break, I would make it a point to go to the local barber shop where a guy had been cutting my hair since I was in junior high school. I had more hair back then. It was a bigger job. You know, this barber's name was Charlie. And he was not just my barber, but he was my neighbor. And I even, at that point in my life, sort of thought of him as a friend. I went to school with one of his sons and went through high school with one of his sons. I would spend a lot of time at his house. His son and I, we prepped for college exams together. I had dinner at his house. He cracked up on his bike one time, and he was in the hospital, and his son and I would go visit him in the hospital. He came to see me in the high school play. It was Our Town. And so, you know, he was my barber, but like I say, he was my friend. And I'm in my sophomore year in college. I'm back home for spring break, and I'm sitting in Charlie's chair getting a haircut. And we're doing small talk and talking about sports and local events. And he starts telling me about this business opportunity that he had been thinking about and that he had been looking into. And he kind of surprises me by saying that he thinks I might be interested in the business opportunity as well. And he even says, like, he wants me to come over to his house in a couple of days and hear more about the opportunity. I'm flattered by this. I think, wow, you know, he's going to tell me about a cool business opportunity. And I in the back of my mind, I think, well, why is he doing this? I think, well, you know, he's a friend, and, you know, he's trying to do me a solid. He found something cool, and he wants to share it with me because we're friends. So the night of the invitation comes. I go to his house, and, you know, there's 8 or 10 people there. And Charlie starts his presentation. Now, I think at least some of you are going to find that this scenario is familiar. You may also have found or had friends or relatives who have approached you about a business opportunity. But this was my first experience with what is known as network marketing, right? Or multi-level marketing. It's sometimes also called direct selling because it's selling direct to end users. As you may know, there's thousands of successful direct selling or multi-level marketing companies in the world. They're a good business model. They focus on a variety of different products. Some focus on jewelry, and some focus on clothing, and some focus on cosmetics. Charlie's company focused on soap and toothpaste and shampoo. But what they all have in common, the engine that drives every multi-level marketing or direct selling business, and by the way, there's a lot of successful multi-level marketing companies headquartered here in Utah. The engine that drives these businesses is getting everyday people like Charlie to sell product to their friends and to their relatives. They incentivize and motivate the Charlies of the world to sell to their friends and relatives. And it's not only, as you may know, selling product to their friends and relatives, but it's also selling this business opportunity. They incentivize everyday people to convince their friends and relatives to also become proselytizers, to become salespeople for the product. So if you join a network marketing company or multi-level marketing direct sales company, you will get commission for the product that you sell. But if you sign up other people and they sell product, you get commission on their sales too. And if they sign up people, you get commission on their sales too. It goes down 6 or 7 levels in many companies. Has anyone had experience with multi-level marketing, direct selling? So were you a distributor, or were you? When I was 18, I sold Kirby vacuums. Okay. Now, what did you do? You sold vacuums? So did you start with the friends and relatives and then expand out, or okay? And just so tell us about your first 2 or 3 weeks doing this. Like, what was it like? What did you have to do?
So you have to haul like a 1,200-pound vacuum to people's houses, give them a demonstration, vacuum up their mattress, which is disgusting, shampoo their carpet, and then of course smoke outside.
Right. So this really highlights what is involved with this engine of direct selling and multi-level marketing. It is an old school, bread and butter sales job. And those jobs still exist today. I know some of you are in, you do. It involves going to people, talking to them about what you have to sell, building an awareness of what you have to sell, and a lot of times dealing with the no. You got to do it a lot. And this multi-level marketing business not only requires you to do that, but then you also have to recruit people and manage the people that you recruit. So if you put the hours into a direct selling job, multi-level marketing job, you can make money. You can do well. It takes longer than a summer to build a business. But so I'm in Charlie's living room, and I'm thinking about, layer after layer, he's like pulling out this stuff from a suitcase that I didn't even know he had. And I'm thinking how much time it's going to take for me to do this. And I'm starting to feel weird. Not about the business, because the business makes sense. I mean, some people think that these are inherently pyramid schemes. The ones that are run well are not pyramid schemes. They're just sales organizations that have a different sort of way of approaching sales. I was feeling weird because Charlie had only told me half the story when I was sitting there in the barber shop. Yeah, this might be a good business opportunity for me, but the main reason he had asked me to come over to his house is because he saw me as a business opportunity for him, potential business opportunity for him. And the fact that he had only told me half the truth and that he still got me to his house made me realize I really trust this guy. Like I didn't even think to ask him, like, what do you mean by a business opportunity? You've never talked to me about business. Tell me more about it. I just figured it was probably, he had my best interest at heart. He wasn't going to try and screw me. So I'll go to his house. And all of a sudden, that trust was threatened. And that made me wonder about the business opportunity. It made me think, well, is this really an opportunity, or is it kind of a shaky venture? Is this really a pyramid scheme and not a legitimate business? Now, in my adult life as a researcher, I spent a lot of time focusing on trust. And yeah, sometimes on the kinds of situations that I had with Charlie, but also on situations where trust works well. And when trust works well, it seems to me that it's kind of like magic. Because when customers trust us, when employees trust us, they're willing, like I was in Charlie's chair, to let their guard down and just listen to what we have to say without filtering, without being skeptical. Customers and employees that trust are willing to take action without looking at the fine print because they figure they got the fine print already solved. I already trust, I don't have to read the fine print. And here's the thing about trust that I think makes it so magic. When people trust us, they are willing to believe in things that they wouldn't otherwise believe in. If they trust us more than the competition, they are willing to believe in things from us that they wouldn't trust from the competition. And when they trust us, they're willing to put their gardens or their vacations in our hands. They're willing to put their careers, their health, sometimes their lives in our hands. And that, I think, is magic. But, like magic, trust is a double-edged sword, right? It can be used effectively, or it can be misused. And people are aware of this. Everybody knows that trust can be misplaced because they've experienced it themselves. Everybody knows that when you buy from a company or you join a company, that company can be revealed as not being worthy of your trust. And so people understand that trust has to be earned. You don't just get trust. People are skeptical, they're worried, and you have to earn their trust. You have to work to get that trust. And even when it's earned, people are vigilant. People are watching out for signs that things have changed. People are watching out for signs that maybe they made a wrong judgment. When Charlie, I still think of it back, I still think he pulled one on me. Maybe he didn't mean to. Maybe he just forgot to tell me the whole story, or the time was running out, there was another customer. But I was very sensitive, even with this very good friend, to the possibility that something fishy was going on. And first of all, I didn't sign up for the business opportunity. And I tell you what, I could not bring myself to go back to that barbershop. Broken trust has serious consequences. Okay, so right now, I haven't told you anything you don't know. I mean, you are very successful in business, and so you're good at building trust. And so trust has to be earned, trust can be broken, trust is a double-edged sword. You're experts, you're ninjas at building trust. You can be put in charge of a brand, you can be put in charge of a client, you can be put in charge of a region, you can be put in charge of a company, and you can inspire trust. You know how to do it instinctively. You can inspire trust in the people who work for you, the people who you work with. You can inspire trust in your customers. If you have investors, you can inspire trust in them. But I think there are signs, very clear signs, and very strong signs, that your trusting expertise, that your ability to build trust is going to be severely tested going forward. Over the next few years, it's not just the people who are good at building trust that are going to get ahead, but the people who are at the leading edge of building trust. And I say that because trust around the world is declining. Let me start in the U.S. Gallup, the polling organization, they've been measuring trust for 25 years. Trust in business institutions and trust in business sectors. And for the last 10 years, trust in business institutions and business sectors has been declining, and in many business institutions and business sectors, trust is at all-time lows. Now, if you know anybody in nursing, so far they have not been affected by that problem. 84% of Americans have high or very high trust in nurses. Doctors, we're going down to 65%. Business executives, 17%. Advertising and marketing professionals, 11%. Don't feel too bad. Members of Congress, 8%. So that's US. And by the way, this is just one of many studies and surveys that have come out showing decline in trust in institutions and business sectors and professions. Another study, a worldwide study, is done by Edelman. They've been at it for more than 15 years, so not quite as long as Gallup, but they have also seen declines in trust worldwide in almost every country and in almost every business sector. And this is a survey of over 30,000 people in 28 countries. Just one fact from really a rich set of data, which is also publicly available, by the way. I encourage you to go see it. It's a lot of great insights, and they've been doing it every year, and every year they have a different emphasis. One fact that they come up with is only 36% of people worldwide trust executives, CEOs, when they come out to talk about their company or when they're a spokesperson for their company. So what does this mean for you? What does it mean for you as a marketer, but also what does it mean for you as a business leader? First of all, I bet for many of you, even if you hadn't seen these studies, and maybe you have already seen this kind of data, you already knew this about the marketplace that we operate in, about a decline in trust. So you already know that because of your day-to-day experiences, that customers are more and more skeptical about the marketing claims that we make and about the way that we make them. And if you're in charge of hiring people in your organization or hiring people on your team, you know that existing employees and potential employees are wary about what are you going to do for them. And they're skeptical about mission statements and employee manuals. And you know, to make matters worse, at the very whiff of untrustworthy behavior sometimes, it seems people are quite willing to go on social media and make a huge thing out of it. And the reason why I think it's especially contagious for people to hear about untrustworthy things is because people are watching out for those signs. Like I told you, people are watching out for signs of, aha, that company came, aha, that can't be trusted, that brand. So, we're going to have to up our trust game. We're going to have to challenge, I think, the habits that we've built up over time that have worked for us up till now. But I'm telling you, I don't think they're going to work quite as well for us in the future. And yeah, maybe they'll work fine, but your competitor organizations, to the extent that they're focusing on this, are going to be trying to up their trust game too. And so how do we do this? How do we up our trust game? Well, there's a bunch of ways, of course, but one way is Trust Project. So the Trust Project is meant to bring together a variety of perspectives of trust, on trust, academic perspectives, business perspectives, into video content. The videos are no more than 6 minutes long, but some are as short as 3. Publicly available, you don't have to pay to gain access, information that you can use about trust. One motivation for the Trust Project is that academic research in trust has really been literally exploding. Okay, not literally, but you could see that trust research really started to take off during the 90s. 10,000 studies on trust in major academic journals. But now we're up to like 8,000 papers on trust published per month. And we figure there's got to be some benefit of trying to synthesize some of this stuff. Get somebody who's an expert on trust in sociology to do a video about what do sociologists think about trust, What are some of the main findings that all sociologists believe about trust? Now that sociologists have been studying trust for 20 years, what are some things that are pretty clear? Yeah, we want to focus a little bit on leading edge content, but we want to know, like, what are the truths about trust? So you can scroll through the videos and find videos that may or may not be relevant to you, and we try and emphasize the connections between these videos. And what I'd like to do for the rest of my time with you here today is to share with you some of the insights that you'd get by watching some of these videos. Some of the tried and tested truths about trust that I think might resonate. To talk with you about the first sort of finding, the first insight, it's really a fundamental bedrock of trust research in sociology, in psychology, and in social psychology. I'd like to ask, what does trust mean to you? And usually I have my laptop in front of me and I can type some of these up, but I'm going to just go with just getting some ideas. When you think about trust, what's a word you think about? Or what's a situation or a phrase you think about? Oh, this is what trust means. Any thoughts or ideas? Truth, okay? Truth. Authenticity. Truth, authenticity. What's that? Transparency. Truth, transparency, authenticity. Consistency. Confidence. Fact-based. What did you say? Competent. Now I want you to think about some of these words. Competent, consistent, truthful. Those are really different things. And when people started studying trust in the 1990s, one of the first things that people realized, I shouldn't say it was one of the first things, because it took a while for its kind of light bulb to go off on people's heads, is that when we ask people about trust, when we try and measure trust, when we try and talk about trust, people mean different things. They mean different things because of their perspective, but they also mean different things depending on the context in which they're in. So the trust we have in our plumber, which might relate more to competence, is different than the trust we might have in our news organization, which might relate more to this truth idea. And so trust researchers have found that it's not so helpful to ask whether a customer trusts a brand or whether a manager is trusted inside an organization, that it's actually a lot more helpful to break trust down into 3 building blocks of trust. In different disciplines, they call these building blocks different things. They have different words to refer to these building blocks, but the building blocks are the same. And I want to just take you through them because they're super important. The first building block is honesty, and this relates to this idea of transparency that someone mentioned. So honesty is the trust we build when what we say matches reality. We build trust by keeping our promises and by telling the truth. The second building block is benevolence. We build trust by making sure that the people that we're dealing with understand that we don't want to try and get as much for ourselves and what they get be damned. We build benevolence, or therefore we build trust, by being willing to strike a fair deal. And maybe even sometimes being willing to give up a little bit for a long-term relationship. We take a little less, we give them a little more because, it's part of the relationship. We want them to know that we're not just out to grab whatever we can get. The third building block, which somebody said here just now, competence. We build trust by knowing what skills are required for the job and by meeting or exceeding expectations for those skills. Now I'm going to illustrate sort of why this is so important. You probably already get it. I'm just going to illustrate with my hands, and because I have only 2 hands, I'm just going to focus on 2 of them. I'm going to focus on benevolence and competence. I'm sure that you have worked with people in your work life. You might even be working with someone right now who is super competent. They know what skills are required for the job, and they exceed those skills. You need a programming solution, you know who to go to. But when it comes to benevolence, they fall short. So they don't care so much about the other people on their team. If the team's working late on a project because there's a deadline tomorrow, they're the kind of person who says, listen, I only work here 9 to 5. I'm going to check out. Good luck with that. And by the same token, I'm sure you've worked with people who are very benevolent. They really care about other people on the team. They care about the company. But no matter how hard they try, no matter how much they care, their competence isn't quite up to snuff. Their skill set is not at the level that you want it to be. They don't even know the skills sometimes. And I hope you can see now why, if somebody says they don't trust a brand or they don't trust a manager, we're not sure exactly why. We're not sure if it's mainly because of low honesty or low benevolence or low competence. It could be all three, and they can be correlated. But to illustrate how useful it can be to measure the three building blocks, I want to tell you very briefly about a project I worked on with a bank in the United Kingdom. It's what they call in the United Kingdom a building society, which is like a credit union here in the U.S. And they are not as international as some of the competition in the United Kingdom, but they're still, at the time when I worked with them, they're still 6 or 7 in terms of market share. But for a long time, their market share had been stagnant, and they were looking for ways to improve that market share, to make headway. And they thought that maybe one way to do that was with trust, particularly because the part of the business that I focused on with them was in financial advisory services. They have a team of financial advisors who work for the cooperative bank, who go around to homes and help individual customers put together their retirement plan, maybe save for college, maybe save for more short-term things like a vacation. And they measured trust. But they just did it with a global measure of what we call a global measure now, because we think if you just ask, do you trust your financial advisor, do you trust the cooperative bank, that different people will answer in different ways. You get a lot of variance, and you won't get a true understanding of what trust in cooperative bank or financial advisor is. And so we decided to run a big survey which looked at the 3 building blocks of trust, as well as a bunch of other metrics. And by the way, we surveyed their current customers, we surveyed competitors' customers, and we surveyed people who this bank thought were likely prospects for investment services, but who likely did not yet have investment services. And what we found across all of those customer groups is that cooperative bank was superior to its competitors in terms of perceived competence, but was average in terms of benevolence and honesty. In fact, one of the maybe even bigger insights from this study was that everyone in the UK, when it comes to financial advisory services, was about the same in terms of benevolence and honesty. By the way, it was kind of low, too. So cooperative banks thought, this is a way that we, particularly given our culture, they're a co-op, a credit union, and so they're owned by the people who deposit in the bank, and they're very neighborhood focused. And they have had a brand over time that has focused on honesty and benevolence. They just hadn't emphasized it as much as they probably should have in individual financial advice. And so they went out into the field and they talked to advisors who we knew from the survey were really high on benevolence and honesty, and we compared them with the practices of the people who were relatively low, and we identified 6 or 8 things that financial advisors could do to build benevolence and honesty in their interactions with customers. And by the way, these are things that many of these advisors were doing already, but they were also doing 6 or 8 other things, or they weren't emphasizing these 6 or 8 things. By the way, they said I can share with the public that one of them is personalization. In this business, personalization makes a big difference. If you tell someone what your investment goals are, and the advisor just very quickly sort of goes through a checklist and says, you need this, this, or this, it looks like they're just sort of taking it off the shelf and not thinking about what the customer wants. That lack of personalization can make somebody feel like, well, they don't really care about me. They're just doing what may be best for them or what they're getting a commission on, and so I don't think that they're very benevolent or honest. Now, I wouldn't be telling you this story if it wasn't a success story. It was. As a result of of increasing benevolence and honesty. It took 2 years, took a big training program, took 2 years. This company was able to, yes, increase market share, but also they were able to increase the average value of each client. And as a result of that success, they had to almost double their financial advisor sales force over 2 years. Now, if you're work for an organization that cares about trust, I bet you already measure it in some form or another. You measure how much your customers trust you, or if you're a retailer, you measure maybe how much your people who work on the retail floor trust you. You might measure internally how much managers are trusted. When you do a brand audit, you might measure how much your brand is trusted. But my question to you is, when you measure trust, are you measuring the 3 building blocks? And understanding how you're performing on each of those 3 building blocks, because I think that can be very strategically informative. Okay, so we got the 3 building blocks. Now, what I'm telling you has been, is trust researchers have known it for a while. And it's been out in the academic literature. And as a result of that, managers have found out about these 3 building blocks way before the Trust Project ever began. One person who found out about these building blocks is this guy who works for the U.S. military, Colonel John O'Grady. His job, he had several deployments in Afghanistan, and his job was not mainly a combat role, but his job was to go into Afghanistan. And as you might know about Afghanistan, it's really made up of different regions that are operated and run by tribal leaders with a very loose, what we call federal organization above that. And so the real key to getting things done in Afghanistan is to get these tribal leaders to trust one another. And this guy, this Army colonel, goes in with his kind of geeky benevolence, honesty, and competence. And he goes and starts talking to these tribal leaders about, we've got to build trust together, and the way we've got to do it is we've got to build it across all of the building blocks: benevolence, honesty, and competence. And let's talk about how we can do that. He tells the story in one of his videos about a big meeting that he had, what was going to be the culmination of a lot of work that he had done and a lot of these tribal leaders had done, that was going to be a big signing of an agreement about training local militia. So you can imagine what had to go into this. Each of these tribal leaders had to agree that they would give people to the local militia, that the training would involve this, that, and the other thing, that the payment, that their contributions would. It's a lot of agreement that went into this. And the meeting takes place, and everybody comes except for the governor. And they wait 15 minutes, 20 minutes. After an hour, everybody leaves upset. And O'Grady takes him 2 days or 3 days. He goes out and finds the governor and says, what the F? What happened? The whole thing fell apart and you didn't show up. And the way the colonel tells it, it took him a while to sort of figure out what happened. The governor was a little sheepish about it, but he eventually said, I got lost. I was going to the meeting, and my driver, we were trying to figure out how to get, I got lost. And the colonel was like, well, why didn't you let us know? And he said, well, I was embarrassed. I thought that it really reflected on, I got lost in my own province. I thought it really reflected on my competence, my intelligence as a leader, and I just didn't know what to do. I figured the best thing to do is sort of not say anything, and they'd figure it out, that, oh, well, he's just probably, a governor, too busy. And O'Grady was like, no, listen, remember the 3 building blocks. You focus on competence, and yeah, listen, if you admit you got lost, maybe people will think you can't get around your own province, but I'll tell you what, much more important right now is benevolence and honesty. You said you'd show up, and you did not. And as a result of that, people feel like they wasted their time, and you didn't put any time into that meeting. So again, here it's a success story. He sends out letters to explain what happened to the people with apologies for not doing what he said, not keeping a promise, for maybe wasting people's time. So he's showing, I will not do this again, he says. And they're able to sign and move forward with the training. But the thing that I think is important about this, and which he emphasizes in his video, is not only the value of talking about the 3 building blocks, but the importance of having a common trust language when you're managing trust. See, I hope you'll find this useful. I hope you find it useful in some way. And if you do, I don't care if you adopt benevolence, honesty, and competence as something that you find particularly useful, but I care more about that you work in your organization and you work with your vendors, and maybe also you work with your sales reps to come up with a common language for talking about trust, because I think if all you do is say, well, we've got to build trust, that's not far enough. That's not a sufficiently common language. So organizationally, develop a common trust language. I'm going to get into a little data now. I'm going to show you some plots. And these plots, these from a few studies, are going to help to communicate to you what psychologists and social psychologists think they know about the different dimensions of trust. Because if, once it's established that benevolence, honesty, and competence are the three building blocks of trust, now, of course, the researchers want to dig in more. How do these dimensions differ in terms of their influence? And how do they compare maybe to one another in terms of how they influence people's judgments? The first study I want to share with you, by the way, if you're interested in learning more, probably the best video on this is Adam Waits. He has a couple of, I think, 5-minute videos which summarize what do social psychologists know about trust. And he also gets a little bit into neuroscience and trust. So one thing that psychologists and social psychologists think they know, because study after study after study has shown it, is that the information that influences my perception of your competence or your brand's competence is very different than the kind of information that influences my impression of your honesty and benevolence or your brand's honesty and benevolence. So honesty and benevolence are on one side and competence is on the other. And the main finding from this research is that when I'm judging someone's competence, positive information, that is information that shows me that you're competent, is more influential than negative information, as information that tells me that you're not competent. They're both influential, but positive information is going to have a much more significant influence on my perception that you're competent than negative information is on your perception that you're incompetent. And the reasoning is something like this. Most people know that nobody is competent 100% of the time. And so people are much more likely to discount negative information about competence. They'll say, oh, somebody screws up on a project, say, well, maybe they're having a bad, they were tired that day, or maybe the situation was tough. Information about honesty and benevolence, quite different. Here, negative information is much more useful and influential. Psychologists call it diagnostic. It's like a doctor. You're trying to diagnose is someone trustworthy, and you see positive information. Oh, they're honest, they're benevolent. You're much more likely to discount that as a good diagnosis of their benevolence or their honesty, because you know that people, even people who are not trustworthy, mainly behave as if they are. They don't want people to know that they're lying or that they're not benevolent. And so they'll pretend that they're benevolent and honest. And it is when you find out, wait a minute, that person lied. When I found out Charlie didn't tell me the whole truth, that was particularly diagnostic of my understanding of him as a not honest person. I'll show you one study about this. This is a study of first and second impressions. In this study, people were brought into the lab, and someone was described to them. And the person was either very honest or very not, or very competent or very not. And then they did something else, and then a second impression was delivered to them. And the question is, if somebody is seen as incompetent, and then you tell them that they're competent, does that bring the person out of the gutter? I think they're incompetent. Or do they stay in the gutter? And the same is true for honesty. I'll show you the data. I'm going to start with competence. So again, people brought into the lab and they're given a first impression. Here's somebody described as being very competent. Or somebody else is told, here's somebody who's very incompetent. And then they do another task, and then there's hey, remember that person I told you about? Here's some more information about them. Everybody was told that the person is competent in the data that I'm showing you. So first impression, competent. Second impression also, first impression either competent or incompetent. Second impression, competent. And the question is, how competent is the person judged after the first and the second impression? Now, it's not surprising if you find out that someone's competent, you're told, sorry, oh, they're very competent at let's say, again, I'll stick to programming. They solved a programming problem very competently, and then another programming problem solved very competently. Your impression of their competence it's a scale of 1 to 10. It's almost as high as it can be. But interestingly, if you're told that someone is incompetent, they screwed up with a programming job, but then the next one they did really well, it's not as good as if they're competent in both cases, but it's still pretty high. It's above the midpoint, and people say, oh, they're maybe not as competent as someone who does it 100% of the time, but they're still pretty competent. Let me show you now what happens with honesty. In this study, they only looked at honesty, but the same results have been found also for benevolence. Again, someone comes into the lab, told, here's an honest person, or they're told, here's a dishonest person. Then they do something else, and then they're told, hey, remember that person I told you about? I want to tell you something that they did that was super honest. And not surprisingly, you tell someone they're honest, and then you give them another situation where they were honest. Honesty's through the roof. Very honest person. But if you tell someone that here's somebody who's dishonest, and then you show them a situation where they're honest, the honest behavior gets very heavily discounted because people think, oh, well, they're honest in that situation, but they probably had to be, or they didn't want to reveal themselves as being a dishonest person. And when dishonesty creeps in, or selfishness, lack of benevolence creeps in, that has a significant negative impact on impressions of honesty. Not so with competence. Of course, if you're incompetent all the time, that'll have a cumulative effect. So here's the two patterns right here. So positive information more influential for competence, negative information more influential for benevolence and for honesty. I'm going to show you one more study which talks about the relative importance of benevolence and competence in making judgments. Here, we're looking at competence separately from benevolence and honesty. Now I'm going to put them together. It's not me, it's a study puts them together. It's just one example of many studies that put benevolence and competence together and said, which is going to be more influential? Relative influence. This is not first impression, second impression. This is just one impression. They created descriptions of people. And the descriptions described how honest, in this case it's benevolent, how benevolent the person was, but also how competent the person was. Now, some of the descriptions describe the person as being very selfish. Others describe the person as being very benevolent. And at the same time, some of the descriptions, I'll talk about that 0 point in a second, some of the descriptions describe the person as incompetent and someone competent. So we have selfish, incompetent, selfish, competent. Benevolent, incompetent, benevolent, competent. What is the overall rating of the person? It's an overall impression. How much do you like this person? There's a couple of other measures. And people were asked, so do you kind of like them? Or do you kind of not like them? I'm going to start with the selfish people. They're described as being a selfish person. They took more for themselves than they should have. All the selfish people got negative ratings. And competence had no influence on those judgments. It looks like those are a little bit different, but statistically speaking, they're not. You show yourself, or your brand shows itself, or your company shows itself to be dishonest or selfish, competence doesn't matter. People are going to think negatively about you or your brand or your retail associates or your customer service reps. Only when benevolence and honesty are viewed you have positive, people see you as being benevolent or honest, does competence start to matter? So even if you're benevolent and incompetent, people like you more than if you're selfish and competent. And, well, of course, this is the big winner, right? You're competent and benevolent and honest. That's going to win in terms of impressions and in terms of trust. The primacy of what's sometimes called warmth, it's honesty and competence put together in terms of judgments, has been shown in a number of ways and through a number of studies, including studies that just look at how people make judgments in milliseconds. And what management researchers have found is that as leaders, as business leaders, we often feel like we should be leading with competence. And we manage our brands that way sometimes too. We've got to be seen as the expert. We've got to be seen as the authority. That's important. We've got to be seen as making quality products. But my question to you is, are you managing your brands? Are you managing you? Are you acting as a manager? Are you managing your company in a way that recognizes the primacy of benevolence and honesty? Or are you overemphasizing competence? So how do we build that warmth? How do we build benevolence and honesty? I already told you about my experience with the cooperative bank, and they found that in their market with their target customers, personalization made a difference. I've found in other contexts that personalization doesn't have as big an effect. And so one thing I've come to maybe realize or learn is that building honesty and benevolence, and probably also competence, but I focus more on the warmth side, is unique to sector, unique to culture, and unique to target customer within a culture. So there aren't that many universal truths that I can share with you, but there are two that I think I can share with you because here again they've been shown across multiple studies. The first is that to build honesty, transparency or perceived transparency seems to have a significant and profound impact on people's perception of your honesty. Somebody mentioned transparency as one synonym for trust, and that I see as being mainly related to building honesty rather than benevolence or competence. One of the business leaders who talks on the Trust Project is Jennifer Thompson, and she talks about the value of transparency in building honesty. The example that she gives is that she was hired to work with a retirement community that was about to go bankrupt. And they struggled with how are we going to manage ourselves through this bankruptcy because we don't want people, families taking their parents out of this community because they feel like they won't be cared for, but we also don't want to lie about the fact that we're in trouble. And as she describes it, they took the courageous move to open their books, to show people, here's where we stand financially. Here's what's coming in, here's what's going out, here's our ongoing payments, here's our monthly payments, and here's our specific financial plan to get us from point A to point B. It's another success story, but they were able to keep attrition in that community to a minimum, they think partly because of being transparent. Now, being transparent is a big challenge because you can't often just, okay, I'm going to just open up the file where our accounting is, and anybody can go in there because people might not understand it. People have to sift through it. People have to understand your file system and what's for 2017 and what's for 2014. Instead, to be transparent, you have to do some work to translate that information, and in doing so, you can be accused of being not transparent because you're not showing the data. So transparency is often a solution that people say is going to help with trust, and I think it does, but it brings its own challenges. An even bigger challenge than the communication problem with transparency is the willingness to be vulnerable, is the willingness to share its information that you're kind of scared about sharing, like, crap, I don't know if this is the right thing to do. But if you want to build honesty, I think you have to learn to live with the vulnerability that comes with transparency. Another interview that we've recently done with Andrew Swinan, who's now the president of Leo Burnett, he talks about transparency within his organization and how he's making a move within Burnett, because he did it in previous organizations, to be extremely open about when the company is facing trouble, as well as when it's having good times. And he says that's a scary thing to do. But he says as a result of that, he builds trust inside his organization. Benevolence. If selfishness is taking more for yourself, if selfishness is, well, when we have a deal with each other, I'm going to try and get a little extra for me. I'm going to write a little something in the contract that you might not notice, and I get a little something for me. Then benevolence is doing the opposite. It's making a sacrifice, a real sacrifice. When people say, oh, I can't believe they did that. You know, they were willing to hurt their profitability, or they were willing to maybe not make their sales goal that year to help me out. One of the business leaders that really emphasizes that on the Trust Project is this guy, Larry Rosen. He's the CEO of a big luxury men's clothing retailer in Canada. And he talks about the importance of a culture of benevolence. He calls it a culture of trust, but what he's really talking about is spending extra money on training his sales force and also incentivizing his sales force in a way that does not reward only sales, but also rewards customer satisfaction. So, as he very proudly says, and as I know is true because I've visited his retail outlets, several of them, his salespeople are willing to say, somebody buys a $3,000 suit, it's the day that it comes in and it actually doesn't fit as well as we had hoped. Those salespeople are willing to say, listen, I know you're going to be disappointed. I know you might even been wanting to wear that suit tonight, and you can, but you got to bring it back because it doesn't look good on you. We're sorry. Or, as you might know, if these customers come in for a half a day of shopping, and hopefully you get a lot of sales, but Larry says, listen, if you're finding stuff, it's not looking good, I want you to say, I'm sorry, we can't find stuff for you today. I'm going to work really hard. I want you to come back in a month, and we're going to have a better assortment for you. One way, and by the way, this finding has been, the idea of unexpected sacrifices has been found to build perceptions of benevolence in laboratory research, like the research I showed you, particularly in negotiations. If people are willing to give up something that really hurts in negotiations, that builds trust in that particular negotiation, but it also builds trust for subsequent negotiations over time. One last thing I want to talk about, and it brings us back to Charlie the barber. I've never thanked Charlie for this, but as a result of that interaction with Charlie, I think that's one of the things that got me interested in trust as a researcher, and I've always been intrigued by direct selling and multi-level marketing. How do these companies balance and manage between the tensions that happen when somebody tries to get a friend to join a business, and the effectiveness that happens when friends work together and when they do it successfully? And so I've done a bunch of studies on multi-level marketing companies and on direct selling companies. I want to share with you one finding about the tension between business and friendship. And to do that, I want to briefly tell you that when psychologists have studied relationships and how we think about relationships, what they found is that the majority of our relationships can be easily categorized into one of two groups. Now, yeah, there are some people who are sort of on the borders of these two groups. But generally speaking, if we say, what kind of relationship do you have with someone, they will be easily categorized as a communal relationship or as an exchange relationship. And there are many differences between them, but there are two big differences that I think have the most impact. One difference is what motivates people to be in the relationship, and the other is how do people keep track of how the relationship is going. Now, in an exchange relationship, both parties understand that the reason we're in this relationship is because we get something from the other person that we're going to be using somewhere else, in our organization or in the marketplace. The relationship that Experticity has with its clients and vice versa, as with any client-vendor relationship or any business partnership, is an exchange relationship. Yeah, you're friendly with each other, but the main reason you're working together is because one organization is giving something that the other organization values and vice versa. And one of the hallmarks of an exchange relationship is that people are keeping track. Now, how many hours have I spent? How much money am I making? And those of you, you all have had client relationships where that balance has gone out of whack, where you're like, I can't believe we're spending all this money. They don't seem to be putting a lot of effort into it. Or on the other side, say, I can't believe this client is really asking a lot from us, and they're not really spending enough with us. When that happens, the exchange relationship gets threatened. And rightly so, because the logic of exchange relationship is we're keeping track. And we all understand we're keeping track. Communal relationships are quite different. The quintessential communal relationship is one that you have with a true friend or with a family member. Most family members. Some of you may have exchange relationships with some of your family members, but communal relationships are relationships that are not, I'm not in the relationship because of something I get that I'm going to use outside the relationship. I'm in this relationship because I like spending time with you. I like hanging out with you. It's what's called an intrinsic benefit, not an extrinsic benefit. And I also don't keep track of who's spending time with who or how much money someone spent on a birthday gift, or even if somebody forgets a birthday or does something that we have to work out, I'm not keeping a tally. Oh, remember last year you said something rude to me and we had that fight, and then later, it's a communal relationship. I'm not keeping track. Now, what multi-level marketing does, but I also think what influencer marketing does sometimes, is it introduces exchange considerations into communal relationships. What psychologists have found is that in relationships that we count as communal, there are certain things that are off bounds. If you have a friend and you know a lot about marketing, and your friend says, listen, I'm starting a business, I need some marketing advice, and you come over and you talk with them about the advice, and then the friend takes out a checkbook and says, okay, so how much do I owe you? That's like, whoa, I just came over, that's weird. That's Charlie. So that's just a diagram, so that's not allowed. So in this study, I looked across 7 direct marketing firms, multi-level marketing firms. And this included some of the bigger ones like Tupperware, Amway, Avon. And I was looking at supervisors, the people who recruit people who are a little bit less focused on business and people who are a little bit more focused on business. In direct selling, some supervisors, they don't emphasize business at all. They emphasize how fun it is to get together for opportunity meetings. We just love the product, and if we happen to sell stuff on the side, that's completely fine. But we love, we love cosmetics, and we're going to have meetings about cosmetics, and if we happen to get somebody new, that's fine. But we're just excited to share information about the product, and we're excited to hang out together. More communal. It's still a business, but it's more communal. On the other hand, there are supervisors who are a lot more business-minded. We're doing this to make money, and yeah, we think the products are good, but I want to make sure that you spend X hours a week, hauling that vacuum cleaner around. I want to make sure that you're keeping good track of the time you spent, and we're going to be very business-like about it. And what I compared in terms of business performance, one of the measures I looked at is how many hours are people spending on this business. You take your average person who's selling vacuum cleaners, and we compare if they have a supervisor that's less business focused versus more business focused, but also, did they have a friendship with the person before they joined the company or not? Now, one thing I was kind of hoping is that, given my experience with Charlie, that if you were friends before and the person's business focused, it's going to screw things up. It didn't come out quite as nicely as I had hoped, but it does highlight the tension between business and between friendship. So generally speaking, if the supervisor is more focused on business, is more cracking the whip, people are working more hours. And by the way, those hours are more productive. And that's especially true when the supervisor, when the person who's working was not friends with the supervisor before joining. If I wasn't friends with the supervisor before joining, and the supervisor's more focused on business, I'm going to work a lot of hours more than if the person is less focused on business. But if I was friends with the supervisor before, I'm going to work more hours if the person is less focused on business, and I'm going to work less hours if the supervisor is more focused on business. I'll just play it out for you. Let's say Charlie was successful in recruiting me into the business. We were friends before. Now, if he manages that relationship with me like a friendship, hey, Kent, you know, we're just in this business because we like the soap and shampoo and toothpaste, and if you share it with other people, that's great, but you're sharing it not for sales, but because you love the product. I'm going to work more hours than if Charlie's like, oh, Kent, you know, you got to sell, I'm looking at the numbers, and your numbers aren't coming in very nicely. Main line is tread carefully when mixing business and friendship. You know this, but here's some data which highlights. And again, many studies talk about the conflict between communal and exchange relationship and what they sometimes call taboo trade-offs. There are some things that are taboo in communal relationships that we have to watch carefully. We're going to have to up our trust game. We have to do it by thinking about trust in a more focused way, understanding that the word trust has multiple meanings, and organizationally it's helpful for us to come up with some common understandings of what trust means. I've found it to be very useful to think about those 3 building blocks that psychologists and social psychologists and sociologists have helped us identify, and to understand that some of those building blocks are influenced by different kinds of information than others, and to recognize that warmth is often the primary influential judgment when it comes to the relationships that we have with our customers and that our brands have with our customers. Because as I said, when we can get people to trust us, we can get them to believe in things together. And it's only when we believe in things together that we can make really wonderful things happen. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Flew one of their biggest fans to like their dream show. That was really cool. And then finally, I think about competence and some of the conversations I've had with Carrie and Denise at Nordic Naturals, and how there's so many options in a health food store. If you're going to be a trusted associate working in those stores, of course, you know, those people generally do a good job with the benevolence, and they're there because they're passionate about it and they want to help people live fulfilled. Better understanding so they can be more competent in those relationships with their consumers. So super helpful. Thank you, Kent. Really insightful stuff, really practical stuff. We are now going to take a break for about 10 minutes. We'll meet back here in 10 minutes, and Kristen Berman is going to kick us off in the next session.